The solution is there within our hands. Say, we have a bill of 66 billion, and it falls within the banks as follows. 42 billion are the embedded losses due to Anglo. 6 billion are the embedded losses due to Irish Nationwide. 10 billion are the embedded losses as a result of AIB. 6.5 billion are there because of the Bank of Ireland, or within the embedded losses in the Bank of Ireland, property losses, and 1 billion in the EBS. And by the way, that doesn't even address mortgage loan losses or SME losses or the almost certain losses that will arise as a result of sub-performance in the management of derivatives. I'm only addressing what you could call loosely by label the NAMA type loans, property development and investment loans. So that 66 billion is undoubted. Now we've got to say who participates in carrying that load. And 26 billion, of course, should be presented to bondholders, because when a bond investor looks at, for instance, the issue of bonds in a bank, they're looking at maybe a 5, 6 or 7 year investment term at a certain rate of interest. And before they commit to putting funds in for that period of time, they kick the tires, they do the analysis, they do the sums, they get all the professional savvy experts on their teams to look into it. And when you think of it like this, they're providing funds for that sort of time frame to those institutions. And those institutions, with their managements, with their boards, their markets and products, they go out using those funds to conduct business. Now, if they conducted business that was essentially really rotten property lending, well then those investors should be taking the direct consequences. Why should depositors who place their deposits for a month, 2 months, 12 months, or maybe a year or two, on the basis that the advertising is allowed to say that they're regulated by the financial regulator, that they're licensed by the central bank, and all those sort of what you would call social guarantees that are part of social cohesion in an economy or in a society? The depositors are entitled to that sort of security the same way as citizens of the state can go out in the streets and be entitled to presume that the Gardaí are doing what they're doing for the safety of the nation. Deposits are similarly treated. So I think what we have to do is, as I said, bring them into a room and say, you're taking 26 billion of this bill. Now the state will look at and address the 40 billion difference, because 26 from 66 leaves 40. And what the state should do is insist that the banks are capitalised at a level of 17.5 billion. And the reason we get that figure is 10 is needed in AIB, 6.5 billion in Bank of Ireland, and 1 in the EBS. Total 17.5. Now 17.5 is a lot of money. 6.5 billion of that should be for the account of the bondholders. That's part of the 26 billion I mentioned earlier in the losses. And that 6.5 billion would be shared between the survivor banks, which will now be recapitalised, temporarily nationalised, AIB and Bank of Ireland. And that 6.5 would be shared probably at the levels of 3.75 billion in AIB and the balance in Bank of Ireland. And that leaves 11 billion of further capitalisation. And the way we do that would be to issue a state bond, an Irish government state bond, for the purpose of recapitalising the banks. And there would be no interest rate on that, so it wouldn't cost the state anything while the bond remained outstanding. And in return for that bond, of which maybe 6.75 would be issued to AIB, and the balance of 4.25 to Bank of Ireland, we would get at least 90% of the ordinary shares in those two banks, so we would control them by a vast majority. And therefore we've been in a position to insist that they get on with their normal banking and also with their loans recoveries. And they would be doing it rather than NAMA doing it. They would retain the loans, and in fact any loans that have been transferred to NAMA could be transferred back. It's only bookkeeping entries, it's not difficult, and there's no serious implications or obstacles to doing it. And the banks would be collecting those written down loans for their own account instead of for the NAMA account. And if the counter argument to that was by the government, well, the government or the NAMA was going to make $1 billion on the revised business plan, well, that $1 billion will now be for the banks, which we will own at 90% levels. And we will get back our investment, the 11 billion of new investment, plus the 7 billion that we invested in March 2009 because there was a 3.5 billion investment in preference shares each to Bank of Ireland and AIB. That's a total of 7. Plus the 11 we'll just be giving in this new solution. That's 18. And how will we get that back? That's the question. Well, the answer to that is, in 5 years' time, both AIB and Bank of Ireland and EBS will, rehabilitated, restructured, rebooted, earn profits of not less than 3.5 billion. That's not over-demanding. And as the majority state ownership, we will be entitled to the value of the banks with those levels of profits. How do we value the banks? Well, you take an easy multiple of 7 times those earnings of 3.5 billion. And 7 times 3.5 billion is 24.5 billion. We will own 90% of that value, which is 22 billion. And we can sell those shares out to markets or to other banks, international banks at that time, for the 22 billion. That's how we get back a lot of the 40 billion that we will have addressed in creating this correct solution to the banking crisis. That's the way to go. It means that bondholders and some of the orthodox authorities may not like it because it means it's a departure from orthodoxy. So what? Orthodoxy is something that the country cannot bear. We cannot bear 66 billion of losses. We've been told it's 50 billion. That's not the truth. It's at least 66 billion. And here is the key to the way forward to restructuring, to face the measurement of the truth